The wooden doors groaned open, and all at once, each voice in the room was stilled. A dense hush enveloped the packed courtroom, as if even the air itself had realized the gravity of what was to come. In the rear of the room, cameras softly clicked, their operators attempting to be invisible. But all noise, the gentle scrape of a chair, the click of a shoe, was amplified in the silence. This was no ordinary hearing. This wasn't another case inserted into the court's crowded schedule. Today was the day the Brown family, once held up as a testament to belief and devotion, would be torn apart in open view, perhaps irreparably. And in the middle sat Kody Brown. His shoulders were squared, his back straight, but there was a weight in the manner he sat, like a man trying to keep up an aching roof. His eyes, sharp and focused as they usually were clouded now, the expression of a man who had battled too many wars and expected this one to be his last. To his left sat Robyn Brown, patting her jacket with shaky hands. The mascara she had so carefully applied that morning was already smudged, proof of hours of crying in the doorway while waiting for the proceedings to start. She extended a hand, her fingers touching Kody's arm, not with faith, but with desperate reassurance, as if to remind herself that he was present. On the opposite side of the aisle, Janelle Brown sat up straight, face expressionless, grip firm on a formidable pile of legal papers. If Robyn seemed to be clinging by her fingernails, Janelle seemed to be dressed for war, eager to fight for what she felt was hers. The tension was so heavy it seemed as if even the walls were observing. On one bench, Janelle's supporters, older children, intimate friends, silent allies, clustered together, whispering in low voices. Across from them, Robyn's family were seated tight, occasionally casting sympathetic glances in the direction of Kody. Along the rear wall, journalists, old hands at celebrity sleaze and courtroom melodrama, watched with great attention, but even they could tell that this was different. This was not Hollywood histrionics. This was uncut. This was actual. Years of tension in the Brown family were about to explode in an irrevocable, very public manner. When the judge came in, all of them stood. The room seemed to tense, silence bearing down until it was almost claustrophobic. Her robe rustled as she sat down, reading the papers in front of her, then looking up at the parties. "Today," she started, "we settle custody, the division of property, and any outstanding disputes between the parties." Her voice was professional, but the subtext was more complicated. She was going to unravel a web of love, betrayal, grief, and finances, a web that had been twirled over generations, which would now strangle everyone who was entangled in it. As the initial lawyer started speaking, Kody's gaze wandered for a fleeting moment. During that brief slip, you could see him recalling the days early on, when the family's togetherness was both physical and psychological, the sound of children laughing in the backyard, the 3 a.m. discussions at the kitchen table. A shared vision that had once seemed larger than all of them. But those moments had been erased, like photographs left in the sun, shapes still recognizable, smiles still intact, but the hues washed out. The present was not a home anymore, it was a war zone. The courtroom contained no room for chairs except the front lines, the quiet conversation, a calculated maneuver, and Kody, in the middle of them all, torn between Robyn's presence and the ruin of his shattered marriages. Janelle, once co-parent and wife, sat in stony silence as her attorney spoke in a smooth tone, detailing complaints, non-unanimous financial decisions, bias toward one house over the others. Robyn squirmed uncomfortably in her seat. She'd heard all these complaints before, so murmured in the kitchen, yelled in halls, muttered on strident car rides. But now those long-rehearsed complaints had the force of law. The presence of the children added another depth of heaviness. They were not all present, but enough to be noted in absence or presence. Some, now adults, sat silently in the back of their parent, not able to believe that the two individuals who had taken care of them now stood as adversaries. Others, still too young to comprehend fully, yet still felt the acrimony in the atmosphere. They didn't know the language of lawsuits, but they did sense heartache. For the elders, this was not merely about custody, it was about allegiance, about choosing which parent they felt had been there for them and which had turned their backs. And then there were the unspoken realities. Robyn's terror, not only of forfeiting her legal status, but of losing the final stability she had held onto following the departure of the other beams. Janelle's determination not to be deleted from the narrative of the family or denied what she felt she was entitled to. And Kody's fatigue, a fatigue that no amount of bluster could conceal. A fellow who used to think he could possess the hearts of many could now barely keep one for himself. Every look that was sent his way had overlays, some anger, some sadness, some yearning for when life hadn't been so knotted. Outside the courthouse, the world waited. Sister wives enthusiasts and critics alike packed behind barricades, brandishing signs, screaming questions, taking pictures. For years, the show had welcomed the public into the family's intimate life. But this was different. This was not staged. There were no second takes, no editors to erase the anguish. For so long, folks had argued whether Kody was a hero or a villain, whether plural marriage was a testament of love or a recipe for disaster. Now, those debates were being put to the test under the harsh light of legal reality. While opening statements droned on, the air in the room grew heavy. Everybody understood that when the actual details started flowing, financial claims, custody wars, sworn depositions, there was no going back. This wasn't law only, this was a public autopsy of a dream which had initially kept a family united. As the first witness was about to be called, Kody cast a quick glance at Janelle. She didn't reciprocate the gaze. Robyn's gaze met his, and her hand slipped deeper into the bend of his arm, as if pinning him. It was a tiny thing, but it said it all. The lines had been drawn. Today there would be no togetherness, only sides. And with the gavel falling to bring things to life, it was apparent to all within the room, whatever transpired here, the Browns would never be the same. It was once that the Browns had shown the world a united front, or so it seemed. On television, they chuckled together at family meals, went camping, and testified with passion about their common faith and calling. Strange as they were, they had been a unit. Polygamy, they testified, was founded on love and trust, and for years that faith had sustained them through the storms of life. But even the best ships sink if invisible leaks are not mended, and for the Browns, water had been leaking into their home for years. It began quietly, as most cracks do. A money fight here, a fight over parenting there. But in a family of this size, tiny cracks can become cavernous splits virtually overnight. Behind closed doors, there were whispers. Kody's visits to some wives' houses dwindled, others more frequently. Janelle was the first to notice. The little change in priorities, how some needs were put aside and others attended to without question. She remained quiet at first, reminding herself not to overanalyze. But eventually, quietness bred resentment. Robyn, in the meantime, came into the family with her own expectations and agendas. She had been promised equal status, but before long was hanging on to Kody's attention and time more tightly than ever. And when she finally received it, she clung to it tenaciously, erecting, inadvertently, invisible walls around herself and the rest of the wives. Next came the day that would shatter what was left. Garrison, Janelle, and Kody's son passed away. The news came like a punch to the stomach. No cameras to capture the phone calls, no lights or makeup to ease the destruction. Kody cried in secret. Robyn hugged him. And Janelle, she stood amidst the wreckage of her own sorrow, trying to comprehend how a family that was so big could feel so tiny. Rather than coming together in sorrow, old wounds burst wide open. Accusations that had been building for years were finally articulated. Janelle accused Robyn of monopolizing Kody's attention, making her children feel abandoned. Robyn retorted that Janelle had always sought to undermine Kody's authority as a father, refusing to take direction from him. It was grief, and it's true, but it was also decades' worth of unresolved resentment spilling over. During the weeks following the funeral, the rift was impossible to disregard. Several of the older children severed their relationships with Kody entirely, holding him responsible for giving preference to one home over another. Janelle's house was a sanctuary for those who felt rejected, a shelter in which to grieve not only Garrison but the family they had lost years earlier, even before his death. Robyn's house was Kody's sanctuary. She provided him with loyalty, comfort, stability, but in the process pushed him farther away from what he had left behind. What had been decided in strained living room debates was now finding its way into court documents. The complaints were numerous: custody of the younger children, control of assets and finances, claims of manipulation and favoritism. Kody reminded himself he never wanted it to get this far. But every conversation with Janelle seemed to descend into blame. Every attempt at tranquility degenerated into arguments over past history. Robyn, seeing the man she loved gradually lose himself, pushed him to clear the record, to stand up for what was rightfully his. Janelle, exhausted after all these years of feeling erased, was equally prepared to do the same. When the court filings were revealed, the news spread far and wide. Headlines shouted betrayal, talk shows picked apart their lives for entertainment's sake. Social media exploded in speculation. The Browns, who had been eager participants in a reality TV show, suddenly had their reality taken away from them. And this time, they had no say in how it was edited. Every sentence in those filings became grist for strangers to argue about. To Janelle's fans, she was the wife who had toiled behind the scenes, making sacrifices for the good of the family only to be left behind. Robyn's supporters portrayed her as the sole wife who remained true to Kody, the only one standing in an attempt to keep hold of some form of the family. And Kody? He was the lightning rod, accused by many of ripping the family apart, but defended by others as a man between impossible decisions. Maybe the most ironic was the way the past had become used as a weapon. Vacation days long savored in memory were now brought out as evidence of favoritism. Money decisions once relied upon were recast as manipulations. Careless text messages had been converted into courtroom testimony. The same passion that had held them together was now driving their ruin. By the time the initial court date loomed, emotional harm had already been done. The children were caught in the middle, some having to pick sides, others backing away from both parents completely. Friends who used to be on their guest list now shunned the subject altogether. Even the show that had catapulted them into international fame was on the line. How do you shoot a family when the family is warring? For Robyn, Kody, and Janelle, the trial on the horizon was never about custody or assets. It was about confirmation, about asserting to the public and themselves that they were in the right. But secretly, they all knew the truth no one would ever utter. Regardless of who emerged victorious in court, the family they had shared was already lost. Then there was the realignment. "We will now address the matter of custody," the judge declared, and the tension in the room seemed to vibrate. This was no longer about bank accounts or property lines. This was about children, lively, pulsing reminders of a love that had once consumed them. And here, each ruling had the potential to change the course of their lives forever. Kody steps forward. He rose slowly, adjusting his tie. His posture carried determination, but his eyes were tired. When he began to speak, his voice wavered just slightly before finding strength. "I love my children," he said, "and every single one of them. I've always tried to be there for them, to guide them, to protect them." It was meant as a simple truth, but in a family this fractured, even love was tangled. Janelle's attorney did not hesitate. "Mr. Brown," she stated curtly, "doesn't it happen that in the past 2 years you've spent a great deal more time with Mrs. Brown," she nodded in Robyn's direction, "than with my client?" Kody hesitated, and the silence was noticed by all. "I spent more time where I was needed most," he replied. Janelle's jaw clenched. Needed most was too close to preferred most for her taste, and she wasn't about to let that go unspoken. As Robyn stood up to speak, she leaned forward, her eyes welling up with tears. "Your Honor," she whispered, "these children need their father. Removing him from their everyday lives would hurt them in ways they might never get over." Her words were genuine, but to Janelle's side of the room, they fell like knives. To them, Robyn wasn't defending Kody. She was suggesting that Janelle didn't know what her children needed. Then there were the exhibits. Things were read out loud to him, requests from older children for assistance, which were met with delays or sidetracked answers. Budgets were presented, and they demonstrated that Robyn's family bills were paid on time, whereas the same requests from Janelle's were disregarded for weeks. The hardest were the adult children's testimonies, some in person, others via video. One son reported he had felt like he didn't exist since Robyn became part of the picture. A daughter acknowledged she no longer asked her father for advice because he never had time for her. Every word hit like a hammer blow, eating away at the ideal Kody had struggled to maintain. Kody's attorney fired back, offering images of him at parties with kids from each home. They read loving late-night messages, trying to demonstrate he remained involved even when not there. Under cross-examination, Kody leaned in, shoulders weighed down. "I've messed up," he conceded. "But my kids understand I love them. I want joint custody. I want to be there for them, regardless of whatever's been going on between adults." It was a moment of vulnerability, one that even some of Janelle's allies privately conceded appeared sincere. The cruelest moment was when the guardian ad litem, the court-appointed advocate for the children, testified to give their report. Each word was weighed, each sentence a step sideways across a minefield. Some of the children, they said, were willing to have more time with their father, others were willing to have less. Most were conflicted, loving both parents yet feeling stretched every time they shifted between homes. The judge sat, taking notes every now and then, her face a mask. For Janelle, it was more than a court case. It was about justice. She felt Kody had played favorites, spending his time and money on Robyn's children while hers were left to struggle. For Robyn, the battle was about security. She feared that without Kody being there constantly, her children would lose the tenuous stability they had finally achieved. For Kody, it was about control and redemption. He did not want to be remembered as the father who lost his children. Not to Janelle, not to the court of public opinion, and not to history. Outside the courthouse steps, the battle for custody had already engulfed social media. Fans were fighting fiercely. Team Janelle viewed her as the behind-the-scenes backbone of the family, sacrificing for years without praise. Team Robyn was adamant that she was the last one who was actually devoted to the original vision of togetherness. The children themselves begged for a halt to the fighting, reminding everyone that they were flesh and blood human beings whose lives would be defined, busted, by the result. But the media held on to every tear, every glare, every strained interaction. For a family long accustomed to being comfortable in the spotlight, this kind of scrutiny was like salt rubbed into an open wound. After hours of testimony, the judge adjourned for a recess. Upon her return, she spoke directly to both sides. This court, she declared firmly, will not be used as a platform for personal agendas. We are here for the children, their well-being, their safety, and their future. If either of you ever forget that, this court will rule accordingly. It was a warning couched in formality, but the message stuck. It wouldn't be about shouting, it would be about demonstrating who had the best interest of the children. By the end of the day, no decision had been made. The hearings on custody would resume with additional witnesses, additional evidence, and additional uncomfortable truths. But one thing was sure, the fight was far from over. The Browns had entered this courtroom already broken. With each new day, the fragments were drawn further apart. Later, in the hallway, Kody hovered beside Robyn, his voice barely audible. Janelle passed by him without looking back, her lawyer in tow. The space between them was not physical. It was a canyon of decades of bitterness, sorrow, and decisions that could never be reversed. The morning of the estate hearing arrived with a chill that seemed to seep deep into the bones of all who were there. The battle this time was not over children. It was over money, property, houses, investments, the material remnants of years of common living. In the Brown family, funds had always been tightly wrapped around love, fidelity, and authority. Central to this struggle was one tract of land that was a dream and a nightmare, Coyote Pass. Initially seen as the future of the family, a home in Arizona where every wife would have her own house, with the shared spaces and shared aspirations in between, it had been intended to represent harmony. Today, it was a battleground. Janelle's attorney did not waste a moment. She stood up, spreading a large map of Coyote Pass, sections labeled with previous suggested plots. "This," she announced, sweeping her finger across the map, "was the plan. My client had an investment of dollars and heart to make this work. She had not only invested her money but her life in a dream Mr. Brown has since hijacked for his own agenda. The words hung in the air. Kody folded his legs, his fists still on the table. Robyn reached across him, whispering something, but his jaw remained clenched. When Kody's attorney replied, his tone commanded the room. Coyote Pass, he started, was meant at all times for the good of the entire family. The family made the decisions together, and Mr. Brown has kept those properties in the best interest of all, including Miss Brown. The placement of Miss rather than Mrs. caused Janelle's head to whip around at him. It was a little word, but a deliberate one, a reminder that their spiritual union counted for nothing under the law. Then came the bombshell. Janelle's attorney produced financial statements, bank deposits, loan payments, property tax statements, each carefully underlined. Together, they told a damning tale, money regularly directed into projects associated with Robyn's home, as Coyote Pass taxes lagged behind. This, the attorney indicated, striking the pile of papers, is not the way a co-owned estate is handled. My client's investments were steered aside, leaving hers vulnerable while another home took precedence. Robyn's eyes blazed. She drew closer to Kody, her voice barely above a whisper, tense. Kody shook his head reluctantly, struggling to maintain his control. Kody's defense countered aggressively, claiming that budget priorities had been set in the face of a changing family dynamic. There were some projects, they contended, which called for urgent attention. Some of the debt, they asserted, had to be paid off before Coyote Pass was an option. But Janelle's team was prepared. If so, her lawyer responded, then why were home remodeling and luxury vehicles ahead of the land that was supposed to be the future of the family? The query rippled through the courtroom. Even some of Kody's own allies shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Until then, Robyn had kept quiet throughout most of the estate discussion, allowing the attorneys to take the heat. But when her own home finances came into play, she requested a word. "Your Honor," she started, her voice shaking but firm. "I've been charged with stealing from the family, but I've only ever done what Kody has done. Every choice we made was to keep our children safe and provide stability. I never requested more than my portion. I asked only for what we required." Janelle did not move, but her attorney sprang up to answer. "And while you were taking care of security for your kids, my client's work was being done without her permission." It hit her like a punch to the gut. Robyn teared up. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Brown, when you and your wives invested in Coyote Pass, what official arrangements were made about owning and making decisions?" Kody stalled. "There weren't official arrangements. We just had an understanding." The judge's brow furrowed. "An understanding is not a legal contract, Mr. Brown. In the absence of one, the court has to make a judgment based on financial input and written intent." That comment changed the tone in the room. Momentum swung in Janelle's direction. She had receipts. He had an understanding. Janelle's attorney set down a thick, heavy binder on the table. A minute-by-minute account of every payment she had ever made towards Coyote Pass, including property taxes she paid out of her own pocket when the family account ran low. The figures were stark. The truth they told was worse. Janelle had put in more than her fair share, and much of that had been siphoned into non-land expenses. At last, Kody's temper broke. He rose, his voice growing loud. "Do you think I didn't care about that house? Do you think I didn't want this family reunited? I did the best I could to keep us from splitting up. But no matter what I did, someone was always dissatisfied, always blaming me." The judge's gavel came down. "Mr. Brown, that's enough." But the harm was done. His raw outburst revealed his fervor and his failure to keep the composed face the courtroom required. By the end, both had drawn starkly contrasting pictures. Janelle's side, a loving wife who had believed in the family dream, left with promises and sand. Kody and Robyn's side, decision-makers who had felt compelled to make tough choices in stressful moments, thinking they were protecting the future of the family. The judge took notes but provided no indication of the direction she might be leaning. She said deliberations on dividing the estate would continue after additional review of the documents. As the court adjourned, the personal cost was inscribed on every face. Janelle quietly collected her papers, her face impassive, though her hands trembled ever so lightly. Robyn trailed beside Kody, arm draped over his, head bent as camera shutters snapped. In the parking lot outside, public arguments became even more vociferous. Opposing supporters fought in the parking area, shouting over who should have Kody pass. But within the family, out of the camera's eye, the harm was irreparable. The land that had once held meaning as a sign of oneness now represented deception. As Kody got into the back of an awaiting SUV, he watched Janelle walk away. It was bitterly obvious that even if the court ultimately divided the land in half, the vision it once had signified was already locked in. The courtroom descended into a heavy, living quiet. Every cough, the scratch of paper, even the creak of shoes rang out like a drum. The tension wasn't in the air alone, it was in each person's bones. Kody Brown sat in the middle, elbows on his knees, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. Next to him, Robyn sat paled, lips pursed into a hard line, mascara smudged under sleepless eyes. Across the aisle, straight-backed Janelle stared straight ahead, her eyes refusing to meet Kody's. When the judge arrived, the courtroom stood as one. She was carrying the verdict, though everyone was aware that this was not merely a legal decision, it was the end of something that had been in the making for decades. Her voice was even and measured, but final, the sort that closes a door forever. After considering all testimony, evidence, and financial records, she stated, "This court adjudicates as follows." The language itself was exact, clinical, but each word hit like a stone that has been thrown into a quiet pond, causing the ripples to spread outward that would ultimately reach every single member of this broken family. The first issue was custody. Joint legal custody was awarded to Janelle and Kody, but primary physical custody was awarded to Janelle. The younger children would reside primarily with her, and Kody's time would be limited to scheduled visits, alternating weekends, and extended holiday periods. Robyn's hand went automatically to Kody's arm, but he didn't move. His eyes remained fixed on the gleaming wood of the defendant's table, jaw clenched hard. For Janelle, the victory was bittersweet. She had struggled for it, yes, but custody decisions wipe away neither years of betrayal, nor the fissures of trust, nor the anguish of children who must choose where they are safest. Next was the judgment on the verdict that would decide Kody Pass's fate and the muddled finances that tied them together. The judge granted equal shares of ownership to everyone who had contributed financially, including Janelle. Certain pieces of land were to be sold off to pay for the debts that had accumulated quietly while the family had been too busy warring among themselves. For Janelle, this would mean that at last she would have legal documentation of her investment. For Kody, it meant losing part of a dream that he had held on to with all his heart. For Robyn, it meant confronting the fact that her security now depended on land that was marred by every bitter word that had been uttered in that courtroom. As the judge dictated the final ruling's terms of child support, property division, injunctions for preventing future conflicts, the legal struggle was over. But the people's cost was still etched on each face in the room. Kody was drawn and expressionless, as if drained from the inside out. Silent streams of tears flowed down Robyn's cheeks. Janelle didn't cry, not now, not in public, but her eyes had a melancholy that no courtroom victory could remove. The judge shut her file, looked up and said, "This court hopes the parties will conduct themselves with civility in the interest of the children. Case adjourned." The gavel cracked sharply. Stepping out of the courtroom was exiting a battlefield. Flashes from cameras lit up. Reporters yelled questions. Encouragement and insults were yelled by supporters on both sides. Kody came out first, Robyn by his side, their hands together but faces firm. They ignored the reporters' stares, making a beeline for the black SUV. The door shut with a thud, almost as if the cover of a coffin. Janelle followed minutes later, her lawyer's arm guiding her. She stopped briefly to thank her supporters before getting into another car. No wave, no smile, only the look of someone utterly drained. In hours, the decision was splashed on every news channel. Headlines blared of the courtroom meltdown of the Brown family. Social media erupted with the likes of hashtag Team Janelle and hashtag Justice for the Kids. Comment threads overflowed with argument, compassion, and condemnation. Some called it justice. Others called it tragic. But to the Browns, it was just the reality they had to face now. During the weeks that followed, legal documents were signed, property deeds transferred, and the custody schedule initiated. The children adjusted, some gracefully, others begrudgingly. Holidays necessitated delicate accommodations. Phone calls between parents were brief, perfunctory, and occasionally channeled through lawyers. Coyote Pass was largely vacant, a tacit testament to what might have been. The vision of one community, a few homes, and shared life was now only a field with 4 for sale signs. At night, alone, Kody sat by the window, reliving the trial in his head, trying to figure out if there had been one moment he could have reversed it all. He thought about Garrison, about the younger children laughing, about Christine's voice, and the good old days when they were all still a family. He never uttered it aloud, but sometimes he couldn't help but wonder if the dream had been doomed from the beginning. Janelle immersed herself in rebuilding. She took care of the children in her care, striving to build a secure and stable home. She didn't rejoice at the verdict. There was nothing to be joyful about, but clung to the quiet belief that she had done what she had to do to keep her family safe. Yet, on some nights, isolation hit strongly. Nights when she recalled meals shared, laughter, and belonging. Those evenings, she permitted herself to mourn not only the wedding, but the whole life that she had created and lost. For Robyn, the verdict brought relief and terror. She had Kody, still, but he was tight, remote. The trial had etched fissures in their marriage that could never be repaired. She feared for the future, for money, for the wrath of the children, and if the allegiance she had struggled so hard to win would last. The law had spoken. The signatures were signed, the orders were final, but the actual verdict, the one carved into their hearts, was infinitely more complicated. This trial had never been about property or custody. It was about identity, loyalty, and the gradual unraveling of a dream they once thought could never be shattered. And during the quiet times, out of sight of judges, cameras, and front pages, each of them confronted the same reality, regardless of who had won. The family they once knew was lost forever.